I
Hey
feel like.
everyone, you caught me in the middle conversation with Annelle Sheline. Annelle Sheline is a doctor. She's a research fellow in the Middle East program of Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. She previously served as a foreign affairs officer at the United States Department of State before resigning. Why did she resign? Oh, yes, you might remember her because she resigned last year in protest over the Biden administration's unconditional support for what is now the genocide in Gaza. And I joined her last second. She joined me because I was supposed to be on vacation, friends. I'm here in Orlando. You all know my setup. I'm with 800 kids with my in-laws, but we're being led by the world's dumbest, cruelest people. It's not even idiocracy anymore. Idiocracy is like looks at us and say, "No, we're smarter than you." And breaking news as of just about 2 hours ago, inevitably, Iran fired missiles at the U.S. base in Qatar. For those who don't know, the United States, the largest military presence, the largest base outside of the United States, is housed in Qatar, and we have about 40,000 U.S. soldiers in the Middle East. So naturally, there would be blowback and escalation as a result of the United States joining Israel in its unilateral strike against Iran. Let's just be honest, war. And from the reporting that we've got over the past 2 days, Donald Trump didn't trust intelligence. He went off of vibes. And as of New York Times reporting today, not just vibes, folks, Fox News, because he saw that it, quote, played well, and that some people were in his ear and saying that, hey, people really like the strike. Look at Fox News. And then meanwhile, there were other people in the White House, it could be J.D. Vance, even Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, who were wishing that Tucker Carlson was on Fox so Tucker Carlson could be giving the alternative view. But because Donald Trump gets his information from Fox and not his own director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, here we are. Here we are now. So with all of that, I give it to you. When to start?
Well, I mean, where to start? Indeed, it is truly. I'm thinking a lot about Iraq and 2003 and the fact that at that time Bush had to go through a whole rigmarole of falsifying intelligence or lying about the intelligence to drag a country that I mean, I was, I was in high school when 9/11 happened. This was a very defining moment for me. And at the time, I mean, Americans wanted revenge. Like it was later, but there had been, the invasion of Afghanistan, and there was very much a drumbeat of war. And still, Bush had to falsify the intelligence to convince Americans to go after Saddam Hussein, who had nothing to do with 9/11. Whereas I think in this context, many Americans are just sort of like, where did this come from? Like, I voted for this guy because he was anti-war. There were polls showing that part of the reason we had such depressed turnout for Harris was because of Gaza, that people didn't trust. Harris had signaled that she thought Biden had done a great job, that she would do all the same thing with her foreign policy. And so,
Yeah.
people didn't show up for Harris, and 29, a plurality of people cited Israeli violence in Gaza as why they didn't show up. That was more important than the economy or immigration for why people didn't show up. So even people, maybe for whom Gaza was not their main issue, people still voted for Trump on this belief that he's the deal maker in chief. He's gonna end the Ukraine war. He's gonna rein in Netanyahu. He's not gonna be dragged around. And now here we are, and the U.S. dropped bombs on Saturday. Iran obviously retaliated, and I think it's a question now of to what extent, like, where is this going, and is the U.S. going to launch a full, a ground invasion? Are we going to do Iraq again? Are we going to pursue regime change? And you had these various officials, as you were saying, Rubio and Hegseth, and everyone saying this is not regime change. We're just going after Iran's nuclear program. And then you have Trump on Truth Social talking about regime change, which is just like he was elected because he had three separate presidential campaigns where this was his main lane, and Democrats left this wide open for him, that to be more anti-war. Hillary was seen as a big war hawk. Obviously Trump's failed presidential bid in 2020. There were a lot of circumstances there. But certainly in this past election, we know that many, many people saw Trump as sort of the less aggressive, and we've had people like Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeting this about like, this isn't America first. I didn't vote for this. We need to spend money at home. And then, then she talks about bombing the cartels. So,
No, but
but still.
there's so much to unpack, right? But we'll keep it. Let's keep it. Let's just focus on the last week because I know it's a lot for folks to connect the dots, and then we'll broaden it out because it does go back to Gaza and it goes back to the war on terror, right? Folks, last
Yeah.
week, Donald Trump actually publicly and privately rejected Israel and said that I'm going to meet Iran and actually have negotiations over, a de-escalation, right? And Iran, under war criminal Netanyahu, wanted to blow it up because Netanyahu's had a war boner, pardon my language, Annelle, and regime change. I've been hearing this my entire life. I'm old enough, folks. I got the gray hair when Annelle was in high school. I was a senior in college when 9/11 happened. And we've been hearing for about 30 plus years, Iran's this close to nuclear weapons, this close to nuclear weapons. Well, Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, relying on U.S. intelligence, told the world 90 days ago, yet again, Iran is not close to having a nuclear weapon, right? So Donald Trump realized, you know what? I messed up by blowing up the very successful diplomatic coup, which was Obama's U.S. Iran nuclear deal in the first Trump administration, where again, because off of vibes and being dogwalked by Netanyahu, I blew it up. And now I realize, let's talk. So he was supposed to talk, folks. A few days before he was supposed to talk to Iran, who unilaterally strikes Iran? Israel. Israel. Donald Trump, okay, now I try to keep the receipts, I know. Marco Rubio the next day says this was a unilateral strike, all right? Moving the United States away from Israel, which to me meant that Netanyahu didn't tell Trump, went ahead and did it. Trump didn't want to look weak. So then Trump realizes, based off of vibes and the reporting that we have right now, oh, this is playing well on Fox, where they have all the war hawks, right? But he forgot his own base, which includes Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey. Anel, we live in the worst timeline on earth because I'm agreeing today with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson. I want to throw up in my mouth. And then Donald Trump said, he literally telegraphs to Iran, you know what? Evacuate Tehran. You know what? There might be regime change. You know what? Unconditional surrender. You know what? I'll come back in 2 weeks. And then the next day. So if I'm Iran, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, this guy, it might or might not actually literally strike against us. Israel has already struck against us. Thank you, United States, for literally posting and tweeting about your plans. They've moved the enriched uranium. So now they didn't even get the enriched uranium. And here we are now. What did I miss? I know.
I mean, one thing in particular is this fact that, like, at which point did Trump start lying? I mean, I think you're right that certainly it mattered that this was playing well on Fox, but also we know you know, Israel struck Iran on Friday, the 13th of June. The weekend before, there had been a meeting where we know, or we know our understanding is that Trump did greenlight these strikes by Israel and then sent Israel 300 Hellfire missiles to
Mm.
facilitate that strike. But then it's just a question of, so how far back did Trump begin lying to Iran, saying, I want a deal, I want to negotiate, my friend Netanyahu's crazy, but I'm the deal maker in chief. And so, from Iran's perspective, to say nothing of, whether it's Russia or, any other country that Trump wants to allegedly make a deal with, why would Iran trust him when again, we don't know when he started lying to them, but at a certain point he was saying, I'm ready to make a deal. I'm here at the negotiating table, while secretly sending, I mean, the US has sent, billions of dollars of weapons to Israel, but specifically these 300 Hellfire missiles to facilitate this attack on the 13th. I mean, I think another crucial thing to keep in mind is the how this, from Netanyahu, like the timing of the fact that Netanyahu had also just dealt with this, essentially a no confidence vote, which he defeated. I mean, his government survived, but so much of this is about Netanyahu's political survival. So Trump is willing to drag the United States, and
Yep.
again, like it remains to be seen what the level of U.S. involvement is. But the 14 bombs that were dropped, each cost $500 million. That is $7 billion just the
Wow.
bombs on Fordo, which didn't we don't know exactly what the effect was, but what largely seems to have been an ineffective attack because, as you said, they'd already moved the nuclear material. And again, all of this is just to support Netanyahu. I think it was just so maddening because right before all this happened, there was supposed to be a UN conference on Palestine.
Yep.
And I understand why many people had said nothing is going to come out of that conference. We're not going to actually see accountability. But it seemed like the world was moving towards saying Israel, the genocide of Palestinians is unacceptable. And the global South had been saying this. Countries like Spain have been saying this, Ireland and other countries. And, it was going to be co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis were frustrated that France wasn't really fully on board. Macron had said he was going to recognize the state of Palestine, and then he was like, well, maybe not. And then it's like, well, why are we getting so bound up in recognition? The real issue here is the genocide. But all that to say, Israel has completely shifted attention away from the ongoing genocide in Gaza, where you have the Gaza Humanitarian Fund killing everyone hundreds of people as they try to get aid. And it's worked. People are not paying attention to Gaza, and Israel's narrative now of being the victim, being fired on by Iran, they've managed to shift the enemy because Hamas was no longer proving an adequate enemy as the world, as we all watched what Israel was doing in Gaza. They had lost the narrative, whereas by shifting it to Iran, they can now, again, kind of, big, bad, scary Iranian regime, they can play the victim again. And Netanyahu gets this war that he has wanted for decades. I love the Daily Show clip where they just showed Netanyahu, you know, for
Going back to
years
the
and
90s,
years.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's and I think what I just hope is that Democrats are paying attention and realizing that Trump has vacated the anti-war lane. And I mean, this is an opportunity for Dems to try to reclaim this because clearly it plays well politically. This is part of how Trump won the White House. This is a big part of what MAGA means is, don't spend all this money. I mean, this is the dismantling of USAID, people being tired of this perception that the US spends so much money outside of our country. I mean, really, we spend so much money on our military, but that we're not actually spending money on what Americans need for healthcare, for education, for infrastructure, for addressing climate. I mean, like, how do we have $7 billion to just spend, drop it, in an ineffective military operation, and yet we can't afford to pay for any of the things that would actually help Americans be healthier and actually secure our future.
I said 2 days ago that the only benefactors or beneficiaries, rather, I should say, of this Israel's war and now United States war on Iran are three individuals or groups. Benjamin Netanyahu, for reasons that you mentioned, because it allows him to consolidate his power and escape accountability and pretty much stay in power until he dies in perpetual war. Number two, the military-industrial complex, because whoever gets the money always gets the money from war by sending our young men and women to die, the military-industrial complex. And three, violent extremists who can use this war for their causes. This includes folks, not just Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Hezbollah, but also this includes white supremacists who have been using and exploiting Gaza for their own divide and conquer, narratives. I just give you Nick Fuentes. Oh, that white nationalist who dined with Donald Trump, and to this day, Donald Trump has not thrown Nick Fuentes under the bus because they know part of their base are white nationalists. So Netanyahu, military-industrial complex, and violent extremists. Right? Nobody else gains anything. And this YouGov poll that came out yesterday, and I don't know if you saw, remarkable poll. I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my life. Going back to your point, how there's an appetite against war, right? How Donald Trump won by kind of giving this bullshit narrative about being peaceful and non-interventionist and America first, which meant not just making America great again, but America would no longer interfere in the world, which is complete nonsense because he's also promised to or threatened to use the military to get Greenland, also done trade wars, also, try to get Canada to be the 51st state. But nonetheless, he sold the bullshit lie. And there's a part of MAGA that literally believes it. Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, right? And so this YouGov poll comes out yesterday. 85% of Americans are against this war in Iran. 85%. My mind is blown. Only 5% are for it. So going to your point, wide open lane for Democrats to be anti-war. Wide open lane to criticize Israel, which in my lifetime, in your lifetime, for the first time ever, according to Gallup, majority has an unfavorable opinion. Wide open lane to, oh, I don't know, talk about Palestinian rights and freedom because a majority of Democratic voters call it a genocide and want a ceasefire. And yet we have Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. So I try to be very fair on this show, right? I don't do it both sides. Trump is not the same as Biden. Trump is not the same as Kamala Harris, folks. You've seen me. I criticized Joe Biden when it came to the genocide in Gaza. I said it would cost the Democrats. I still said vote for Kamala Harris because it's not even close for the reasons why Annelle mentioned, right? There's climate change, there's gun violence, there's Medicaid, yada, 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 yada. But when it comes to this, it seems like we have two pro-war parties, Annelle. Am I wrong?
100%. And the as you said, it's like Netanyahu benefits. He's been wanting this for years. The military-industrial complex always benefits. And after resigning over Gaza, I had a lot of people ask me about the Israel lobby, and certainly AIPAC is a powerful force. Various aspects of the Israel lobby have a lot of weight in Congress, but the military-industrial complex is way more powerful and gets what it wants every time. And we're looking at a $1 trillion Pentagon budget this
Yeah.
year, and things like the Golden Dome. This idea that the United States needs something similar to Israel's Iron Dome when it's completely inconceivable for the United States to protect ourselves with, anti-missile defense the way Israel, like it is not possible. And yet Trump is throwing money at it because it enriches, the CEOs of these major defense corporations, and that, they give huge amounts of money to both political parties. As you said, we have two pro-war parties. And Americans have been fed these lies that we are under attack, that we have to be afraid when we are so safe from foreign attack. We're not safe from climate change. We're not safe from the fact that there's no social safety net and Americans can't afford, like people like people don't have housing. People, don't have as many children as they might want because it's just too expensive, or they don't have any, or they're worried about, bringing kids into the world under these circumstances. I mean, Americans have reason to feel deeply insecure, but it's not because a foreign country is going to attack us. I mean, unfortunately, I think the more that the United States continues to behave in this reckless manner, undermining the post-World War II order that we set up, saying that World War II was, in addition to the Holocaust, just the vast amounts of horrific deaths by civilians. I mean, the world after that, led by the United States, said we cannot fight wars like this anymore. This is unacceptable. And so we set up the system of international institutions to help prevent that. And Biden, as well as Trump, I mean, we knew Trump didn't care about international law, but Biden, who said the rules-based international order, yada, yada, I'm going to reestablish U.S. leadership, et cetera, and certainly cared a lot about international law when it came to Putin invading Ukraine, did everything he could to undermine the UN, to undermine the International Court of Justice, to undermine the International Criminal Court when it tried to hold Israel accountable. And so while fundamentally I don't consider Americans to be under threat the way so many other people around the world do, have to, countries have to be aware of not being jerks to their neighbors because their neighbors are right there, whereas we have Canada and Mexico and two huge oceans. Like, Americans are fundamentally so blessed by our geography. And this is something John Mearsheimer talks about all the time, that, like, although he gets very concerned about China as the only real pacing threat, and I consider that threat also overblown. But all that to say, the real threat to American security is not from a country like Iran. It's really not from any other country. It's from the fact that our government doesn't prioritize what is needed to help keep Americans safe, from our health to our education to our future under climate change.
And also, the number one domestic terror threat in America for several years running is white supremacist terror and right wing terrorism. And we just saw it
Right.
a week and a half ago. Vance Walter, 57-year-old shooter, terrorist, had a list of 70 people, which includes abortion providers and Democrats and folks. He killed a state representative in Minnesota and her husband, injured two others. Completely out of the news. Why? Because the shooter is a white Trump supporting Christian nationalist. And someone mentioned it already. I'm glad they did, because I've been on this. 22-year-old Thomas Fugate, ex gardener and ex grocery store assistant, is our chief of countering violent extremism in America. Do you feel safer? I mean, I want to talk about Gaza in a second, and because it relates to Gaza, and I don't think people have connected the dots. But I also want to mention, Anel, before we get there, that suppose this war escalates, and I hope it doesn't. What we're finding out right now, folks, all breaking news, is that Iran coordinated with Qatar, so gave them an advance warning about its missile strikes. Qatar, that's why shut down its airspace, and I'm hoping this is sword rattling by Iran, saying, "Listen, America, we can strike your U.S. base in Qatar. We can go after your security. We are not going to, Iran isn't suicidal. They're not a nuclear weapon. Whose nuclear weapon? Israel and United States. Who struck Iran? Israel, United States. So Iran on a one-to-one cannot defeat United States or Israel, but they can engage in asymmetrical warfare and actually cause damage when it comes to our U.S. security, U.S. troops, right? The world is a battlefield, folks. U.S. tourists, Jews around the world, everyone's a target. Muslims, Arabs, right? So that's the fear. And I think Iran, I hope Iran, by signaling to Qatar, hey, you really want to start this shit, U.S.? Well, guess what? We can strike within one day, within 1 hour, we can send missiles to Qatar. So I'm hoping cool heads prevail. But suppose, God forbid, Anel, this escalates. I don't think people realize. Can you talk about our current military, how it's so compromised? The National Guard and the military are being used against who? LA residents and citizens. We have Tulsi Gabbard, who the fact that she's our DNI makes me this, my God. But even then, Donald Trump doesn't rely upon her. All right, there you go. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, who is so untrusted, according to military.com, that now troops have no respect for him. And you can't even find a senior advisor because they think he's incompetent. Also, these mother effers use Signalgate, which means our allies can't trust them to give actual information because, like, some dumbass is going to invite Jeffrey Goldberg and just share this military plans, right? Then we've gutted our cybersecurity, right? We have Thomas Fugate, this 22-year-old, as the head of our countering violent extremism, right? The trade war has been a whole failure. We've moved away from our allies in NATO. We threw Ukraine under the bus to kiss ass to Russia. We're threatening war with Canada. This is just top of my head, folks. So you're the expert. God forbid if this escalates. Are we even in a position right now to have competent people execute a war strategy?
No, absolutely not.
So that does not make me feel better. I was hoping you'd disagree with me, but
No, I mean, absolutely. We know, Trump liked Hegseth because he was a Fox News personality and looks good in a suit. Trump likes people straight out of central casting. And as you said, Tulsi Gabbard came out and said there is no evidence from our intelligence that Iran is moving to weaponize its existing nuclear facilities. There's no evidence of that. And as you said, Trump was like, well, I'm not going to listen to her, my director of national intelligence. And
like literally, well, he threw her under the bus twice publicly in the last week.
exactly. And then it's also going after previous allies. I mean, people like Tucker Carlson, who have been saying no war with Iran, and he's posting about how Tucker's crazy. Like, he's anyone who stands up to him, and we know this about Trump. So he only wants the people around him who will say yes to him. And this is the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2, is that during his first term, you did have people around him who told him no, who were willing to rein him in, and he's purged all of those people. And so even people who were otherwise fairly sycophantic, like Tucker Carlson, who've been saying, what are you doing? You got elected because you said you weren't going to do stuff like this. And he's trying to resist it. And now he's turned against Tucker Carlson. So it's just evident that in order to stay in Trump's orbit, you have to continue to kiss up to him and just applaud, dear leader, you are so wise, you are so brave. I mean, we saw this with the military parade. Like, it's very clear who Trump is, but there's no one around him now with either the capacity or the inclination to try to guide, to steer the ship. And we have the most powerful military the world has ever seen. I mean, it's not.
Everyone is Annelle right now. Everyone is Annelle right now. Annelle, a
Well, I mean,
professional. Annelle, who was in the State Department. Annelle, who's a doctor in this PhD. Annelle, who's an expert. Even what they've made Annelle become.
I mean, it's in many, you look at things like, for example, Japan and South Korea are not going to be attending this NATO summit because of Trump's strikes on Iran. So, like, some of our closest allies, and you look at like the amount of trade the US does with South Korea and Japan in contrast to Israel. I mean, Israel's not a major trading partner. Israel's main trading partner is the EU. Like, we are in no way dependent on Israel. We don't need Israel for anything. It's just Christian Zionism,
Yeah.
and the fact that these Trump is so indebted to people like Miriam Adelson, who's given him hundreds of millions of dollars for his various presidential campaigns. But it in no way serves America's strategic interests to continue to just do Israel's bidding. And yet this is what we're likely to continue to see. And I mean, as you said, this is contributing to the fact that, like, Israel, which had previously always been seen, Americans just generally have a fairly positive view of Israel historically. It's just seen as, they're like us. It's a fellow democracy in the Middle East, et cetera. That's not the case anymore. And I mean, in many ways, I think Netanyahu sees the writing on the wall, understands that both young Democrats and young Republicans no longer view unconditional support for Israel as making any sense whatsoever. So I'm sure he saw this as maybe his last ditch effort to drag in the US to go after Iran. And as we already talked about, this is great for him politically, so he can stay out of jail. Israeli elections are coming up next year. I mean, I wouldn't, given what we continue to see coming out of Israeli society with ongoing support for genocide in Gaza and massive support for the strikes on Iran, they're probably going to reelect Netanyahu or someone worse. I mean, there's no viable alternative in the Israeli political system.
That, that was,
But it's
sorry, go ahead. Continue, Annelle. Continue.
Well, I mean, sorry, just the last point, just being like, at which point will American politicians wake up to the fact that Americans do not support Israel and this sort of unconditional, just throw billions of dollars at Israel and let them attack Lebanon and Syria and now Iran and continue to genocide Palestinians? Like, they are the destabilizing force in the Middle East. For so long, there's been this narrative that it's Iran. Iran has responded with restraint every time when there was the exchange of missiles, in April of 2024, again in October of 2024. Even now, Iran's response, as you said, was quite measured to Qatar. It might just be kind of to signal, hey, US, we can hit you hard. Interestingly, they chose Qatar perhaps because Iran and Qatar have relatively strong relations. And so by doing essentially a symbolic retaliation that had no casualties, Iran knows that it's not likely that Qatar would sort of get drawn into this anti-Iran position. Whereas, something like Saudi Arabia, the Iranians have been working very hard to try to reestablish a relationship with Saudi Arabia, which MBS has been open to because he's trying to prioritize Vision 2030. I again, I'm hoping that these Gulf leaders who were just applauding Trump last month, and he went there and was like, U.S. military interventionism was such a mistake, and we're not going to do that anymore. And MBS and MBZ were like, and and Amir Tani in Qatar were all like, great job, we're going to buy so much American weaponry, and thank you for turning this page on U.S. foreign policy. And now I'm sure they're all like, what did we, who is this guy?
An idiot, right? And even folks, look, Saudi Arabia, for those who don't follow Middle Eastern politics, there's a regional war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, right? You could see it in Yemen, right? These Gulf states do not like the Iranian leadership. Sunni Shia, right? But even these Gulf states now, which would love a regime change in Iran, but they realize that a regime change vis-a-vis Israel and United States doing a war would threaten their regional stability, which is why you're having these people on the deal say, whoa, 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 back off, right? So even they realize, and these are the people who have like wet dreams of regime changes, in Iran, even they realize this will create mass instability. And I want to remind people that, it's easy to start wars, hard to end them. And then you and I are old enough to remember, they sold the war on lies to the American public when it came to the weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist in Iraq. They said that they would greet us as liberators, put garlands around our neck, that democracy would bloom. Didn't happen. Generational trauma and what rose from the unilateral strike that the United States did against Iraq, ISIS. And then who's in charge right now in Afghanistan? That regime change. Taliban, folks, right? So people in the Middle East get it. They realize whenever US and Israel mess with us, it's going to be bad, right? And also these violent extremist groups, even though they're weakened, they're not gone, right? Hezbollah was created because Israel invaded southern Lebanon, right? So yeah, you could kill them all, but if you keep occupying and invading, something else is going to sprout up. We saw it with ISIS. So even the Gulf leaders realize slow your roll. And again, the Gulf leaders realize that people will probably be united even with Israel, with Iran, because they see Israel and the United States striking them, right? So you saw that today, I'm sure, in Iran, all these people are like, Iran strike back, damn it, they're coming after us, right? And in Iran, folks, diverse population of 90 million, a lot of people do not like the repressive regime of the religious guardianship of the Ayatollahs. But even they're like, yo, if you're going to attack us and declare war, what happens? People unite. So we have that. But I also want to talk about, I want to connect the dots when it comes to Gaza, because I believe what we're witnessing right now, Nell, is you mentioned that the lane is wide open. Uh, 85% of there's 1,000 people who joined us. Thanks so much. I'm going to have the entire conversation with Annelle up in about an hour or so for those who missed it with the transcript. But Annelle was talking about how the lane is wide open for an anti-war party. 85% of Americans who were polled yesterday are against this war. 85%, only 5% are for the war. Majority of Democrats and a majority of young people on both sides are against helping Israel commit its genocide. Israel, according to the new Gallup poll, is now underwater for the first time in your life and my life. However, and I said this about 2 days ago, the establishment is not with the people. The establishment, whether it's corporate media, I'm sure you've seen it the past 2 days, they're banging their war drums. Fox News, New York Times, right? When it comes to the billionaires, the law firms, we saw this with Gaza and the crackdown on pro-Palestinian activists and the crackdown on anyone who's critical, and the fact that AIPAC and ADL and Bill Ackman and Schumer and Jeffries and all those people piled on, let's be honest, to Columbia University. And then you're seeing, shift. Biden gave a green light to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu felt emboldened to cross every red line, felt emboldened to commit an act of terror, not my words, Leon Panetta words, in Lebanon, right? Do these strikes against the Israeli generals. No pushback. They still got weapons. Netanyahu still got money. So I'm sitting here thinking this goes back to Biden and the establishment giving a green light to Netanyahu, because this could not have happened without those green lights. And you took a brave stance 1 year ago and said enough is enough, and you quit. So this is my take on it, but you're the one who quit. So you tell me if I'm wrong, because you were on the inside during the Biden administration. I know.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you
mean,
for
it,
my.
it was,
I had to get it out of my system.
yeah, no, I mean, it was so maddening, being on the inside, because I was working on human rights at the State Department, human rights in the Middle East, a department which Trump has now completely dismantled and is firing all of those people. I mean, it was a very different time, but I, you know, Biden liked to talk about how human rights were going to be at the center of his foreign policy, and he pulled out all the stops. He used U.S. intelligence to gather information on Russian abuses of Ukrainian human rights, which is fully appropriate for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, it was very clear that when it came to the human rights of white people, Biden was very concerned. And yet, as soon as October 7th happened, and I've gotten questions about this of like, well, after the shock of October 7th, how quickly did it? And it's like, I mean, if people remember when Josh Paul resigned, he was the very
Yeah.
first State Department official, and he resigned 2 weeks after October 7th because he was involved in allowing the weapons to go to Israel. And it was clear immediately you had statements of genocidal intent coming from Israeli leadership. So Josh resigned right away. Then you had Tarek Habash, who was a Department of Education official, resign. And they've now launched a new policy, which is an organization dedicated to trying to get U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East to not just be about Israel, but actually about U.S. interests in like supporting U.S. interests in the Middle East. And I was working on human rights. And I think initially there was this sense that like, okay, this is the chance, you're in the room, you're in the conversations, like you're able to work on human rights under this administration. They say they care about human rights, and they just didn't. They just did not care about the lives of Palestinians.
Mm.
Biden is a huge committed Zionist, and even people way up the hierarchy from me who were questioning because as you said, I mean, you had intelligence officials and terrorism officials coming out and saying we were hearing on signals intelligence that like we know people are recruiting on this, on the fact that we know that extremists are recruiting on U.S. support for Israel's genocide in Gaza, and like none of that mattered. And then you so I resigned in March of 2024 after it just, became just so abundantly clear that it was impossible to try to advocate for human rights. You'd sit across the table from a North African delegation and start to talk about their abuses of journalists, and they would just laugh at you. Like, of course they would. Like, what credibility does the United States have to talk about human rights when we are directly enabling Israel's genocide in Gaza? And so I decided to quit because at that point there were, if people remember, it's a long time ago now, but things like the uncommitted movement, where it seemed like there was some public momentum gathering around to try to signal to Democrats, like, we're not going to vote for you, Biden, if you keep doing this. Like, we don't care that the alternative is Trump or Ron DeSantis. I mean, at that point, it was still kind of up in the air. But people, it seemed that public pressure was having some kind of effect. And so I decided to go public because colleagues inside the State Department asked me to go public. I
Good for you.
initially wasn't planning to, because I hadn't been there very long. I wasn't very senior. I was like, nobody's going to care what I have to say. And yet it was colleagues who said, please speak out about this. We are violating our own laws. And this, like, even if you don't care about the lives of Palestinians, which I do, but like, for many people who only care about, U.S. national interests, it's like, this is so not in our national interest to continue to support this. Again, not only from the perspective of the atrocities that we're enabling, but just from the broader question of international law and the international system and the way that we have torn it down. And as you were saying, this was all under Biden. And if Biden had shifted, or if Harris had shifted and signaled quite clearly that she was not going to continue to aid and abet Israel's genocide, the polls show that she would have had a much better chance, that turnout among Democrats would have been much stronger for a candidate, Harris or whomever, who came out and said, enough is enough. We're not going to continue to support this. This is horrifying. This is not what America is supposed to be. This is not what Americans want. We don't want to bomb babies. We don't want to starve children. This is not who we are. And yet she didn't. And Trump won in part because he said he was going to end that. And obviously he didn't. I mean, though he did get that initial ceasefire. I mean, I think initially there was some sense that, like, okay, maybe Trump will rein in Netanyahu. And yeah, I think that was just about demonstrating that he could get a ceasefire when Biden couldn't. And my understanding of that is that Trump actually did threaten to withhold U.S. weapons. And that's why Netanyahu was willing to agree to the Inauguration Day ceasefire, despite the fact that Netanyahu knew he would lose his governing coalition over that. And he lost Ben-Gvir, who then came back, but Smotrich was willing to stay and his government didn't fall apart. But I mean, from Netanyahu's perspective, he's just trying to stay out of jail. But Trump clearly is willing to rein in Netanyahu when he thinks it serves his purposes, whereas Biden never was. Like,
Yep.
Biden was just unwilling, and anyone who suggested that, you were immediately shut down.
I appreciate your courage, and so many people who are watching, almost 1,000 people. It's tough to walk away, and I have a lot of friends in the State Department. I have friends in the who are in the Biden administration. I won't name them, but they echo what you said: is that most people in the administration, people like you, were horrified, and most people saw this as a genocide, and most people wanted Biden to do more, and most people realize it's not in the U.S. interest, and most people realize it would hurt Democrats and Kamala Harris. But Biden was intractable, unmovable. Him. Brett McGurk, who's a human cockroach who keeps filling up, Jake Sullivan, Kirby, Blinken. He was ensconced with this group that would give a green light to Netanyahu to do everything to embolden Netanyahu. And they said that, on this issue, he just would not move. There's nothing you could have said. For Biden, for whatever reason, he was able to evolve on other issues. On this issues, like I always joke, I know this. Ooh, I'm gonna give you like a terrible mental image, folks. Like apparently Golda Meir, I'm just convinced she like I don't know, kissed him passionately or something, or maybe they had this amazing love affair because he goes back to Golda Meir of the 1970s, and you're like, bro, it's the 21st century. Like, what are you talking about? There's occupation and genocide. He just refuted it. He was like ossified in 1970s, like Golda Meir, right? He keeps talking about Golda Meir, and you mentioned again, and the reason why I'm connecting the dots is. Folks, I try to keep the receipts, and maybe I'm brown skinned and Muslim. I remember, let's go even take the DeLorean back. The dehumanization, the not being able to see Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims as people, the lumping. A Palestinian is a Muslim, is an Arab, is an ISIS, is an Al Qaeda, is Intifada, right? You saw this with the war on terror. You saw the drumbeat of war with the establishment. All the people who were remember that the journalists who were interned with the military, right? Anyone who spoke out, they crushed us. They crushed us. I was part of the anti-war movement. They called us versus them. We were anti-American, we were traitors. My God, they went after Representative Lee, they went after Susan Sontag, right? They went after the Dixie Chicks, right? You had the Patriot Act as a result of this fear mongering and warmongering. You had ISIS that was created during the war on terror, which has now been unleashed against Americans, which is what we warned about, right? The war on terror, right? Islamophobia being mainstreamed. You had Donald Trump using Islamophobia against Barack Hussein Obama, right? All of it's connected, right? Trump, what did he run on? The Muslim ban. What was the first thing they did when they got in power? Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon. The Muslim ban, right? Then you had October 7th. And then you had all these establishment forces just crush. And now let's be honest. Anyone who was pro-Palestinian, the students, they threw him under the bus. Columbia University threw him under the bus. Claudine Gay, thrown under the bus. Melissa Barrera, the actress of Scream, said, she quoted an Israeli expert on genocide who said it was a genocide. Spyglass fired her from Scream, right? And I'm just giving you some mainstream examples, right? Anyone in the government, crushed, right? Pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil detained without any criminal charges. And Schumer kept quiet. Let's be honest. Jeffries kept quiet. Democrats kept quiet when it came to this, right? And then it took Senator Van Hollen, folks, by himself to go to El Salvador to say, I'm not going to leave until there's proof of life of Kilmar Garcia. And once that was in the news, and then Democrats realized, oh, wow, the American public is against this, then Democrats went and visited Mahmoud Khalil and Rameza Ostrich in the detention center, right? So you got this. You got Gaza, then you have Israel striking Iran, and you have the same establishment being somewhat muted. I'm just trying to connect the dots for you. It's all connected. And folks were quiet when it was pro-Palestinian activists. They were quiet when it was transgender activists. They were quiet when it was undocumented. Now you got ICE and National Guard military terrorizing Americans. You got universities being defunded and terrorized. You got free speech pretty much disappearing. You got full-scale assault on foreign students who apparently are going to have their social media vetted. And now we have war with Iran. So, Annelle, is there a lane? Oh, and also, election tomorrow in New York, folks. Look what they're doing to Zoran Mamdani. They're calling him terrorist, intifada. They're darkening his beard. And the entire establishment, Annelle, has come out for Cuomo. I personally think it's connected. Am I wrong here?
You're not, I mean, but also the anti-Semitism charge. I mean, this is the thing that they keep throwing around that I think finally people are just, if everything is anti-Semitism, then nothing is. And there's no awareness or attention to like the actual white nationalist anti-Semites who do things like carry out attacks on synagogues. And that's not the concern. The concern is anyone standing up for the human rights of Palestinians or the human rights, of undocumented immigrants or anyone, any brown-skinned person who gets caught up in ICE dragnets and deported. I'm reporting on children left alone because their parents have been deported and there's no way to even reunify them. I mean, I remember people freaking out about the child separation policy, and yet I'm not seeing the same level of freak out when they're doing the same thing, except now they're just dragging people away from their homes and their lives and their communities that they've built here. And I mean, as you said, it's very easy to go after, people like Mahmoud Khalil, given that he was prominent and outspoken and courageous, and yet portrayed as anti-Semitic, even though he never spoke out against Jewish people. I mean, it's all such bullshit. And I mean, my hope is that because they have so cheapened this idea of what it means to be anti-Semitic, that will no longer be a slur or a charge that really carries any weight. It's sort of like the word terrorist. I mean, and you hear this all the time in how Israelis talk about kind of all Palestinians as terrorists, or as you saying that like Palestinian equals Muslim equals Arab equals Al Qaeda, like this equation that any brown Middle Eastern person is or could be a terrorist. And there was never really a reckoning from that. And there was never a reckoning from Iraq. I mean, I understand why Barack Obama didn't decide to spend political capital on going after all of the crimes committed by Bush, because he was trying to get Obamacare passed and he was trying to like actually do things for the American people. And he won another term on that. But I wished that there had been the political capital available, or just more of a recognition of the need to hold people accountable for the lies that dragged us into Iraq.
War
Because
criminals.
otherwise, war criminals. Because otherwise, because they're just running the same script now, and it's working. And you have someone like Trump. I mean, for all that Biden was such a horror show on Palestine, what I heard over and over inside the State Department was that the red line was regional escalation. And, Israel could genocide Palestinians, and Biden literally did not care, but he did not want regional escalation. And so, Israel attacking Lebanon, that was accepted, attacking Syria in the, final days of the Biden administration. But like the Iranian attacks that we observed were these sort of stage managed, coordinated, minimal casualty events. And so, although again, Biden is a horrific genocidal Zionist war criminal, I have to give his administration credit for not buying what Netanyahu was selling as far as we have to go after Iran. And yet in Trump, Netanyahu, I mean, he was a great mark. Netanyahu knew if you could get Trump back in the White House, he could get this war with Iran that he's been wanting for decades. And now here we are.
Here we are, and I kept you longer, but you were on a roll. Annelle, served in the State Department, folks. Annelle is an expert on these issues. She resigned because she was disgusted by what she was seeing with the Biden administration's allowing Netanyahu to commit a genocide in Gaza. It's gone far worse, folks. It's a humanitarian crisis. It was one before even the genocide. Now there's starvation and famine. We haven't even talked about the West Bank, and it's all connected. That's what we try to do on the Left Hook and also with my show Democracy Ish with Danielle. I'll try to connect the dots. And sometimes when you're really confused, I always say the twin sins of America have always been white supremacy and greed. You don't like the word white supremacy? Fine. Racism and greed. And I give you the war on terror, and I give you what's happening now, the dehumanization, right? The slurs, the racist conspiracy theories against people of color, Arabs, Muslims, undocumented folks, right? The propaganda that comes from corporate media, the fear, right? And then you allow the crushing of pro-Palestinian activism. Mahmoud Khalil gets just loses his liberty for 104 days without any criminal charges. The fact that Columbia University bends the knee and throws its students under the bus, all these people are terrified, right? Then, of course, the annihilation of Gaza. Anyone who speaks out is blackballed, and it takes Annelle literally resigning to speak out against it. Military-industrial complex keeps making money, right? Who keeps making money as ICE is terrorizing America? Private prisons, folks. Private prisons. The stock has gone up. You know what's also gone up as a result of Trump joining Israel's stupid war? Gas prices. Gas prices have gone up. So white supremacy is ultimately so self-destructive and dumb. And now we have a war with Iran and the demonization against Iran, and no one cares about the 92 million people. Mike Huckabee and Ted Cruz prayed for Israel. No prayers for Iran. That's dehumanization. Why don't the Iranian people deserve their prayers as well? They're not the regime, right? But I digress. But folks, that's what happens. It's wars are easy to start, hard to end. And conflicts like these have a long tail end, right? Even if there's not war, there is dehumanization, there's escalation, there's blowback, there's violent extremism, and there's lack of trust. And the world is moving away from the United States, our country, the country I was born in. They look at us as a joke. And now I will say one thing. I'll end on this. I'll give you the final word, but dark humor. My cousin in Karachi, Pakistan. If you've never been to Karachi, Pakistan, I've been there many times. It's tough. It's a tough life. My cousin came here, studied, went back, was going to come back here. And he said, bro, I was going to come visit America, but I canceled my trip. Things look rough. When people in Karachi, Pakistan, and he wasn't even trying to be a troll. He was just like, bro, things look rough. And I'm like, when people in Karachi, Pakistan are like, yo, I'll just stay in Karachi for a while. It didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be this way, but alas, here we are. Anel, I'll give you the final word. People listen to you. They don't listen to me. Who am I? I'm nobody. If you could give some advice to Democrats who have political ambitions in the future about what they should say and do in this current moment, how would you advise them?
Well, we have a war powers resolution coming up. So Thomas Massey, who's a Republican, and Ro Khanna, who's a Democrat, introduced a war powers resolution in the House that goes along with Senator Tim Kaine's war powers resolution. Now we have like a competing war powers resolution from more mainstream Dems. It's sort of, I mean, regardless, Congress need, if there is a war, there should be a public debate around it, and people should call their members of Congress and say no war with Iran, vote against authorizing this war with Iran, because we this in the past the executive branch has just been able to launch these wars. I mean, you mentioned Barbara Lee, who spoke out, was the sole
My
vote
representative, UC Berkeley.
the sole vote against the authorization for the use of military force in 2001, and at the time was pilloried, and yet still has her seat in the House and is looked to as a paragon of integrity and understanding, as you said, that wars are easy to get into, especially when the United States. And how long were we in Afghanistan, and how, like, we're still in Iraq? And to what effect? I mean, the Taliban, as you said, I mean, these are things that everyone is aware of. But I think it's so crucial, as you said, that everything is connected. And so what I would want to leave people with is, for now, we can still call our representatives. We're still nominally a democracy. You can still say no war with Iran. Post about it, talk about it. I encourage people to resist and make clear that this is not something the American people want. As you said, the polls are very clear on that front, but Congress hasn't necessarily caught up to that. I think the concern right now is, if there were to be a war powers resolution, the concern is that Congress would authorize a war. So they need to hear from their constituents, and hopefully we will not go to a full-on boots on the ground, congressionally authorized war on Iran.
And I also think the water is warm here, Democrats. You can say free Palestine. The water is warm here. You can criticize Israel and war criminal Netanyahu. A majority of American Jews hate him. His base is Christian giant Zionists and the right wing. And you can finally say it's a genocide. It's a genocide. What we're watching is a genocide. The final command of the government, according to 1984 George Orwell, was, don't believe the evidence of your eyes and ears. We have streamed a genocide. A young generation has been radicalized in real time. You cannot bullshit them anymore. So I think this is the time. Who will stand up and call it out for what it is? Anel, I think that's the person who can lead us to, well, first of all, if you're a Democrat listening, you can win. But secondly, more importantly for the rest of us, you can lead us out of war, out of this madness, out of this bloodshed, and towards, I don't know, spending money and resources on American healthcare and jobs and wages and Medicaid. Just a thought. Anel, a pleasure finally talking to you. Thank you so much. Anel, literally, I got an email from Quincy Institute, and they're like, "Yeah, we're offering you Annelle." I'm like, "Oh, can she do it in like 20 minutes?" And she said yes. So this was our first time talking, no notes. For those 1,000+ people who missed us, we've been talking about 55 minutes. I'm going to have this up in an hour. Strongly recommend listening to Nell. She dropped a lot of gems. If you are horrified, she's just as horrified, and she's an expert. We'll have a transcript out. Nell, before I let you go, please shamelessly promote yourself. How can people support you, and how can people follow you? And they should support you, and they should follow you because you did the right thing. You're one of the very few people who publicly said this is a genocide, and you quit your job in the United States State Department. It took a lot of guts. I applaud you on behalf of everyone else. So how can people support you?
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I spend too much time on Twitter. I know a lot of people are off Twitter at this point, but I'm still there. So Annelle Sheline or at Annelle Sheline. And I just got on Instagram publicly. I had a private Instagram, but I'm also now on Instagram talking about this stuff, also at Annelle Sheline.
All right, wonderful. And also, she writes. Well, she's housed at the Quincy Institute. They're doing fantastic work. I had a couple of experts a couple of days ago, Trita Parsi among others, and they have many experts there who are very, let's say, non-neocon and non-hawkish. They actually want diplomacy and responsible statescraft. Thank you so much. If you all want to hear from Annelle, and if she's kind enough to join us again, let me know. Annelle, hopefully you can come back in the next week or two, because I'm sadly, I think the story ain't going away.
Thank you for all of your work. This is so important. And people, I really appreciate all of your tireless efforts to draw people's attention to this and to the people for listening. I know it's a lot of work.
That's all I have. But you know what? We survived that first war, and I don't want to get dragged again. And we were unsuccessful during the war on terror, but inshallah, maybe this poll has given me hope. And now 85%, 85% being against war, only 5% for it. That is wild. So that gives me hope. The establishment doesn't give me hope, but the people give me hope. Folks, we will be back. I think I might do one more Substack Live today before I go spend some time with my kids in Orlando, because I'm supposed to be on vacation, but we're led by the dumbest people on earth who drag us into war. So you got to speak out. Thank you, Annelle. It's again Annelle Sheline. She's an expert. Quincy, follow her on Twitter and on Blue Sky, and this will be up in about an hour or so. Annelle, pleasure. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.